Hello and welcome to today's episode of Piano TV. So today we're doing a Q&A session, and this one is going to be about tendinitis and hand injuries. So just to get things started, I want to say that I am not a health professional, so always refer to your doctor and stuff like that. Where I'm coming from with this advice is just what I've experienced in my studio and with my own personal practice. I've never had a hand injury. I take pretty good care of myself, and the same is true of the students that I've taught. So anyway, let's get started. So the question is from Michael, and it is, my instructor was telling me about the possibility of getting tendinitis and other hand injuries from practicing the piano too hard. I'm especially concerned with this because I'm beginning to play some of Chopin's pieces with the hand stretching and intricate left-hand patterns, both of which seem to exhaust my hands. I'd be very happy to have your input on the topic. It's a good idea to be proactive about avoiding any type of hand injury because it's much more difficult to correct an existing problem than it is to just not develop that problem in the first place. So I want to spend the rest of the video basically going over different points and different things that you can do to protect your wrists and your hands and your arms. Things like genetics, lifestyle, consistency, stuff like that tends to play into it. So hand fatigue versus hand pain. There's a really big difference between just experiencing general hand fatigue and actual pain. Hand fatigue is something that I would liken to doing a bunch of push-ups and then your arms kind of get a little bit tired. And usually if you're experiencing fatigue like this, all you really need is a rest, whether that be a 1 minute rest and maybe an hour rest, maybe a day rest. But it's not something that's going to create long-term problems. It's just kind of a natural response of working your body. Now, hand pain, on the other hand, is different, and that's a really big red flag. A pain would be like a sharp shooting pain, something pinching, like a nerve issue, anything like that. And if you've exercised before, you should be able to pretty clearly tell the difference between fatigue and pain. I want to share with you a couple specific examples of people who I know quite well who have had to deal with some type of hand injury of some kind. So Exhibit A is the guitarist of my band, who I'm going to talk about briefly here because he got pretty bad carpal tunnel a while back. Now there was a few factors that played into it. Number one, genetics. It runs in his family. It's something that he's susceptible to, and that's true of a lot of people. It's just something you can't really prevent. The genetic part. You can prevent getting carpal tunnel, but the genetics part. Other things that he was doing, he was playing in 3 different bands, and one of those involved a lot of really heavy action bass playing, and he also plays a lot of video games in his spare time, and he also works at a desk job at a computer. So he was basically constantly using his wrists, and he ended up getting so bad that his wrist kind of felt like jelly, and he couldn't play music for a year, in any kind of major capacity that he was used to. So that's obviously a pretty big problem if you're a musician. He managed to rehabilitate himself. He's doing better now by getting acupuncture, by resting, by getting more ergonomic support at work, things like that. Another thing that he used is you can buy these armbands that put pressure or take the pressure off of certain muscles. I'm not entirely sure how they work. They're really cool though. The second example, Exhibit B, is my husband. And I think his example is a little bit more common. It's something that seems to happen to more people. So what he ended up doing, he's a drummer, and he went through a period of not really playing anything complicated or challenging for a while, to all of a sudden playing for hours, especially doing complicated drumming. This is my drumming. So he doesn't have any genetic issues. There's no one in his family who experiences carpal tunnel or anything like that. What he did though is his problem was he tried to push through the pain. So instead of stopping when it hurt, he just kind of kept going and going and going, and then he created problems for himself for a few months. And he also found relief by using those armbands, but there was a while there where he really he couldn't really play. And luckily that didn't manifest into a more serious problem, but that's something that happens to musicians a lot. So how do you not develop this as a problem in the first place? Well, obviously not overdoing it as per Exhibit B. But another thing that you can do is hand stretches and exercises. And this is too much to get into in this video. You can just do a quick Google search for carpal tunnel hand exercises, wrist exercises. And if you want to check out the ebook that I wrote a while back called How to Practice Piano and Like It, there's actually a part of the book where there's illustrations of different exercises that you can do to prevent injury. And another thing that I found personally is I enjoy doing yoga, and I found that it's actually done a lot to strengthen my wrists. It's been really great because my wrists, like your wrists in yoga end up taking quite a bit of like weight and pressure, like more in here, but my wrists are much stronger than they used to be. And and I'm just more flexible in general, and I find that's helpful. Take frequent breaks. If I'm practicing something that's pretty demanding and I start to feel that hand fatigue, that wrist fatigue, then I'll take a break. I'll either switch over to playing something easier, something slower. Maybe I'll do the same part but really, really slow. Or maybe I'll just like stop for a while, like my session's over. But those kind of like, or even just like pausing for a few seconds to take a couple deep breaths is another just like really short break to re-oxygenate your muscles. I think I just made that up. I don't know if that's a thing. Tension is another major cause of pain. So just watch that when you're practicing, that you're not, getting claw hands when you play. Try to keep as fluid and relaxed as you can. And that's a really difficult thing to do, especially if you're playing fast, but it also makes your playing sound better. So it kind of has a bonus benefit. One thing I also do with my practice sessions, if I'm doing more than one in a day, is I tend to spread them out. So if I'm motivated and I want to practice like 2 or 3 hours in a day, I won't do that as like one lump set of practice. I'll do like 2 or 3 sessions throughout the day just to kind of break it up a little bit. And I find that that's useful mentally, but also physically too, because it's not creating as much strain. Consistency is really important when you're trying to avoid injury. So don't use the example of my husband to go from 0 to 100, because that's how problems can start. If you aren't practicing at all and then suddenly you're like, oh, I'm going to practice something really challenging for 4 hours, you might run into problems. What I do is I generally practice in short blocks, 30 minutes to 45 minutes, and then call it done, and then do another block later in the day and later in the day. It's not going to cause you problems probably if you go from, say, a 30-minute session to an hour session, or from 30 to even an hour and a half. But if you're going from like 30 to 2 hours, or like a bigger jump, you might want to just be extra careful. And this doesn't matter if what you're playing is easy, like if it's not creating any tension, you can kind of play for hours. But if you're doing something really demanding, it's important to keep your practice times relatively consistent. And just a quick note on overall general health too. 2 things I find can possibly be contributors to hand injuries, and that is fluid retention and inflammation, because carpal tunnel is essentially inflammation, and fluid retention can create problems in the hands too. So one thing that I do is I generally try to be pretty modest with my salt consumption, because eating a lot of salt can cause fluid retention. So that's like a pretty easy, it's not easy for everyone, but it's a pretty like easy to understand way to just kind of help your body, especially if you're more susceptible. And as far as inflammation goes, I mean, again, it's beyond the scope of this video, but there's lots of different things you can do. There's lots of different anti-inflammatory foods you can eat. Mainly things like berries, fruits, vegetables, those kinds of foods are really helpful in reducing inflammation in general. So that's not like, do this and 100% you won't get carpal tunnel, but it's just one of those things that I incorporate into my lifestyle, and I haven't had any problems with like hand injuries yet. Hopefully ever. And that is all for today's Q&A session. Feel free to leave any questions you might have in the comments below, and I'll take a look at them for the next session, which will probably be in 2 or 3 weeks. And yeah, I always enjoy looking through them and seeing what you guys are thinking, what you guys are struggling with, and then trying to give my input as best as I can. So hopefully you found this helpful. Give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you haven't already. And feel free to check out the cards at the end of this video if you want to hang out with me over on social media. We also have a Patreon page if you'd like to check that out. And I will catch you in the next video. If I'm practicing something, sneeze. Whew. Okay, never mind, it didn't manifest.